Please welcome back to the program, calling in from Little Rock. We've got State Representative Dan Sullivan on the line. He represents District 53. That's a portion of northeast Arkansas. Dan, welcome, sir.
Hey, Paul. How are you this morning?
I'm doing good. I'm doing very well this morning. So you're down in. We were just talking to your friend, your colleagues, State Representative Jeff Williams. He was on last hour. Had a good discussion with him about the budget process. Have you been down there for these budgetary hearings as well?
Yes, and I do listen to Jeff personally too, not just on the radio. But he's a wise representative. He has a good grasp of what's going on, especially in these budget and tax issues, and really glad to hear his position on these.
Yeah. So a ton of stuff has happened this week. We have, and the task force, they let go or fired the consultant. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. I'd also love to get your thoughts on the headlines yesterday. The proposed budget is a $172 million increase, a growth in government. What are your thoughts on all this, Dan Sullivan?
Well, first of all, I think we've got a great group called ACRE. You've had those folks on your program several times, the Arkansas Center for Research in
Economics.
Economics. Thank you. And those are some smart folks. They have a book out, a small pamphlet, Arkansas, the Roadmap to Tax Reform. I've read that the last few days again, and they just have a great roadmap as they describe it, and I sure hope our folks will take a look at some of our local experts, because we do have them. They're very familiar with our local economies and our state economy, and take some consultation from them. As far as what's going on the other, of course, on the healthcare side, I've heard, Brian King, Senator King's position. I agree with what they're talking about. The one big issue I think that we really don't mention, the executive department hopes they get these waivers approved, and we're hanging our hat on the fact that these reductions in numbers are going well, and we want to hope to continue to reduce those. And once we get the waivers, well, there's a strong chance the Trump administration not only will grant the waivers, but there's a very strong chance they will increase Arkansas's portion. For a while Arkansas paid zero on for health care. And that was one of the primary reasons we passed all of that. Arkansas Works was to get that 100% Fed payment. And Senator King asked, what's the difference? Well, here's the difference. The difference is when the feds paid 100%, we made a lot of money. Now that we're paying 5%, we're trying to purge those rolls. That's the difference. Clearly, I think there's not many want to say that publicly, but that's where all the money's involved right there. And it's in Arkansas's, for a while, it was in Arkansas's best interest to have a lot of people on the roll. Feds were paying it, more money came in.
Because of that premium tax, because the state government also, taxes the insurance premium, so they get a portion of it. So the incentive was just way out of whack. I mean, the incentive was for us to just spend.
Exactly, and now that's the thing that's changed. So Paul, I think anytime any of your listeners went out to buy a large product, if you went out to buy an automobile and the dealer showed you an automobile that had all the luxuries on it, all the accessories, and said, well, and here's the price, you'd say, well, show me something else. And you would walk away from a dealership that said, no, this is it. You don't want to see anything else. This is it. And you would say, no, show me something else. Well, I think during those hearings, I heard a couple of senators and a couple of people say, well, what would Arkansas's budget look like without Arkansas Works? I think the administration it's incumbent upon them to show the taxpayers, to show the legislators what a budget would look like without Arkansas Works. And let us have that debate and do a little bit of comparative shopping.
So
let us know what that looks like.
Do you anticipate getting those numbers? Because, I mean, it was interesting because, Brian King raised an interesting point. They used to say, getting rid of Arkansas Works would cost us money, would put a hole in the budget. Now they're saying reducing the rolls. You had Cindy Gillespie admit that it's better financially if the roles are smaller, which makes perfect sense. It should have always made sense. And so do you think we'll actually get to look at how much money we would save by getting rid of the program?
Well, we were told we would. And I think it's incumbent upon the administration to provide that number. Of course, the difference is, and there is a difference, the difference is previously the feds paid everything. Arkansas had no skin in the game. Now Arkansas has skin in the game at 5%, and it is to our benefit to reduce those rolls. But the voters need to remember that, the Trump administration could easily come back and say, we're going to grant all these waivers, which will help you actualize decreasing the numbers, but we're also going to raise that from 5% to 6% or 7% or 20%, which will put a huge hole in our budget. That's my biggest fear right there as a legislator, is going forward with Arkansas Works without having any comparative data. What does it look like if we go to 6%, 8%? What does it look like if we get out completely?
Well,
I think that's important.
I really, What comes to mind is Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin, back when he was in D.C., a congressman, he said about this whole experiment with Medicaid expansion that from a federal standpoint, there is no dedicated funding stream. So the first chance that they get, they're going to start to mess with these, this 90-10 match rate, maybe more like 70-30 eventually, which is what traditional Medicaid is. And of course, now we have the funding for the entire Obamacare system as a whole. It's just been, had the leg swept out from under it because the individual mandate's gone. And so, we need to take these, these things into reality and just quit thinking about, maybe the politics of it all, or let's just talk about the fiscal reality. Arkansas has a bloated government, and if we keep overcommitting ourselves to have to fund welfare programs for able-to-work adults who are not working, the rest of us who get up and go to work every day are suffering because of that. Our taxes have to be here, can't be lowered in order to sustain this big government behemoth, really.
Yeah, and Paul, let me bring up one other issue, but that didn't matter before, that does matter now. This is a failed business model, or has a failed point in the business model. The failed point is that when we enroll people, when people enroll in Arkansas Works, we're paying for them $500 a month. And the administration is taking a lot of credit, and deservedly so, for reducing those rolls. And they've done a great job. They inherited that. They've done a good job and worked real hard to reduce those rolls. However, there's no mechanism in place to prevent that from continuing. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that, when somebody enrolls, the state starts paying $500 a month to the insurance company. It may take us a month, it may take us a year to find out that they don't qualify. Now, if you and your private insurance, Paul, or the listeners and their private insurance, if they did that and their insurance company found out that they had fraudulently enrolled or they just made an error, they would be sued, they would be recouped. If you were a government provider or a Medicaid provider and you had patients on your roll that shouldn't be receiving Medicaid, all that money would be recouped. Mm-hmm. You would have the inspector general at your door, but not so with Arkansas Works. With Arkansas Works, people just enroll, we start paying. And that is a built-in inherent error to the program, and there will always be an error rate. Before, again, it didn't matter because the feds picked up all of it. But now that it's on the state dime, you can see DHS scrambling, get rid of those people, because now we are the ones paying for it.
Yeah, so you can really kind of tell, this was always about, if the administration gets serious, you actually can, attempt to shrink the rolls. But it's all about, what's the current incentive? And I think the incentive is now shifted, and we now know that this is unsustainable. It always has been. Now we're talking with State Representative Dan Sullivan. Dan, I wanted to ask you, I saw this headline a couple of days ago that UAMS to cut 600 positions in order to meet their budget. Want to know if you've been following that story. I also have another headline here: UAMS shakes up Conway Hospital rivalry. Have you been following any of this stuff? Do you know anything about it?
Yeah, very closely, and thank you for asking, Paul. They are UAMS. Their budget hearing is today at 1 o'clock, and I've got a bunch of questions for them. But part of it, Paul, is not due just to UAMS; it's due to the legislature. The legislature uses UAMS often as what we call a pass-through. There are, DHS calls pass-through. DHS has employees that are paid for by UAMS, but they actually work at DHS. DHS runs a Head Start program down here. UAMS runs a Head Start program down here in Little Rock. They run several businesses, and they get federal money and state money, and we call it a pass-through. I heard you talk about GIF money today. Essentially, we have a government pass-through. Essentially, the legislature uses UAMS to fund employees that actually work at DHS. That's very similar in principle to GIF money.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be talking about that some today. The other side of this, there are really two budgets for UAMS: the government state-funded and the hospital-funded. There's a lot of crossover there. But essentially, we are UAMS in a position where they get enhanced reimbursements. They have what's called cost settlements that other hospitals and other businesses do not get. And for UAMS to use that to create a competitive advantage in the free market, I think violates all the principles that I stand for, and my core principles of not having government compete in the private sector or against private people. And that's essentially what's happening. And it's happening, they run several businesses where that happens. The DHS has started this managed care program, this PASS, they call it, where, and I won't go into the details we've talked about before in the program, but UAMS is partnering with Blue Cross Blue Shield to form one of the most powerful managed care agencies in the state of Arkansas. And if we're using state dollars to do that, maybe that's just wrong. Now, can they do it, and is it legal? I don't know. But in principle, we should not be funding state institutions. They're actually a college, just like all of our other colleges. Can you imagine up in northeast Arkansas if Arkansas State University started selling John Deere tractors or started a lawn care service?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, if you're up here, talking about in the flat land where you have farmers and you already have existing industries that are businesses selling tractors and that sort of thing. That is a very good point. I think that would be very weird. It'd be very strange. People would say, why would the state funded institution start selling tractors?
Well, first of all, Arkansas State, they wouldn't do that.
Right,
they
right.
understand that what their mission is, and their mission is to help everyone, not help themselves with an improved special status in a competitive market. And I hope UAMS will take that same position, that they want to be a helper to all, and in the network for helping all of our states, and not just helping themselves. I had legislation last session that would have stopped some of this competition. And I met with the administration at UAMS, and they said, Dan, we'll do a better job of this, and we'll correct some of these things. It never happened. And essentially, they started this, they escalated their participation in the private network, in the private sector. So, again, I'm just real concerned about that, and hope we can get to some answers during the session today.
So tell us, I have a text message from a listener wanting you to kind of reiterate, what meeting are we talking about here that that concerns UAMS?
Yes, their budget hearing is today at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
And we're going to go over their budget today at 1.
Okay.
And, I sound like you have some listeners down here in Little Rock that are very aware. Of course, UAMS is one of the largest employers in the state.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the largest in the public sector. They run a Head Start. They This is a pass-through for child abuse centers, for our violence protection centers, and they're all good things. So in and of themselves, the $500,000 we spend on a project, in and of itself is a good thing. But how are they managing it? And are they the appropriate pass-through to be running a child abuse center? There's one in Jonesboro. They do great work.
Mm-hmm.
But is UAMS the group to be overseeing that? Or what's the outcome? And those are the questions that I'll ask today. So when you manage an event, what's the outcome? How do they do it?
We got to go to break, but Dan Sullivan, one more question. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Is this, you are speaking out for liberty, and you're specifically speaking out, against the current status quo with UAMS. Do you think that's why maybe you have a primary opponent who is backed by the medical community and all the hospitals and everything else?
Well, I would think that would be a very good reason for, that. Yes, I do. I think
Okay.
There's a lot of money. There's a lot of money flowing to my opponent. When you look at where the money's coming from,
Yep.
That's exactly where the money's coming from.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you speaking.
Maybe you can get him to come on the show, Paul.
Well, maybe. I haven't had a return phone call yet. Dan Sullivan, State Representative for District 53. I appreciate it, sir. Be safe down there at the Marble Palace.
Thank you, Paul.
All righty, folks. We got to take a break. Back in just a moment.